The mogul's reckoning. A silent miracle. He walked away believing he was making the right choice, the most convenient one. But what if the life you abandon keeps growing, and one day it shows up to collect? Stephen walked leisurely through the central square of a small town in England, under the gentle afternoon sun, and the distant sound of children's laughter. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Perhaps he just wanted to escape the tedium of his stressful routine. A corporate social project had brought him to the town, but his heart felt restless, as if something, which he couldn't name, was about to happen. It was then that he heard a high-pitched meow mixed with children's giggles, a sound so pure and carefree that his feet changed direction almost on impulse. In front of a small shop with a colorful facade adorned with flower pots and animal toys, he read the handmade sign on the door. My Sanctuary. Curious, he pushed the wooden door, which swung open with a jingle of a bell. Inside, the scene disarmed him. Two little girls were playing on the floor with a white kitten with big eyes and soft fur. They were smiling as if the world were made only of affection and lightness. But what froze him was something deeper. The girls' eyes were a deep blue, exactly like his own. Those eyes didn't belong to chance. One of the girls turned, laughing, her brown hair coming loose from her headband with the movement. The other, quieter, petted the cat delicately, as if she could feel its essence beyond touch. Stephen felt a hollow in his stomach. He didn't know if it was possible to recognize a part of himself in someone he had never seen. But there it was, a certainty etched into his chest. For a moment, the sound of the bell, the smell of pet food in the air, the afternoon heat, everything disappeared. Only that suspended instant remained. He leaned on a nearby counter, seeking balance. That's when a firm, yet calm voice cut through the silence. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" He slowly turned. The woman behind the counter seemed frozen in time, her dark hair pulled back in a messy braid, her eyes more mature, but still the same. It was Valerie, the same woman he swore he had left in the past. But now she was there, in front of him, and by her side, two little girls with eyes that would never let him sleep in peace again. Valerie's gaze was a foggy mirror, no tears, no pleas, just presence. A woman who had known abandonment, but had not surrendered to it. Stephen tried to say something, anything, but his throat was dry. The words wouldn't come, perhaps because no words could fit into that moment. The girls, oblivious to the silent hurricane between the adults, laughed and showed the kitten as if it were a trophy. Stephen could barely look at them. Doubt no longer existed. They were his. They were part of what he had once left behind, believing it was the right thing to do, or at least the most convenient. Now, everything screamed the opposite. Valerie stepped forward and took a small basket of pet toys. Her gesture was calm, almost rehearsed, but her eyes didn't lie. There was a firmness that didn't ask for permission to exist. Stephen took a deep breath, trying not to tremble. Part of him wanted to run away, as he always did. The other part knew it was already too late. Here, in this little sanctuary for animals and wounded hearts, life had come to collect its price. And it was collecting it with beauty, with innocence, with the kind of love he had spurned, but which now seemed to be the only thing that truly made sense. A father's awakening. Stephen stood still in the middle of the shop, as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. His heart was racing, out of sync, and his throat felt too tight to let any words escape. On the outside, he was the same elegant man, accustomed to important meetings and making cold decisions. On the inside, he was just confusion and fear. The girls continued to play, oblivious to what that moment meant. Their laughter was light, without guilt. without a past. But for Stephen, every sound was a painful reminder of what he had lost. That laughter could have been part of his life from the beginning, and he had thrown it all away without even looking back. Valerie watched him with a firm but not cold look. She didn't seem surprised to see him there, as if she had imagined this reunion many times in her mind, and now was simply living the scene. Her eyes said it all. Don't expect tears. Don't expect hugs. I've already cried too much for you. He tried to smile, a fragile gesture that didn't even reach his eyes. He wanted to say something, but he realized that any word would sound too small in the face of what was in front of him. The girls, his daughters. That reality settled inside him with a weight that felt physical, a weight he had once refused to carry. The more talkative of the two, Isabella, though he didn't yet know her name, showed him the white kitten with pride. "Look, Mom, he likes me," she said with sparkling eyes. Valerie just nodded, with a brief, contained smile. Stephen watched this scene like a stranger, looking through the window of a house that could have been his. "Do you want to adopt one of the kittens?" Valerie asked, her voice firm and neutral, as if he were just another customer. It was clear she didn't want to make things easy for him. He needed to feel what sheiled. He needed to be pushed into the same abyss she had to climb out of alone. And deep down, he knew he deserved it. Stephen slowly approached the counter but kept his distance. His gaze sought hers, but she only met it for seconds before focusing back on the girls. It was as if she were saying, "My priority is over there, not you." And for the first time, Stephen understood what it was like not to be the center of anything. Part of him wanted to kneel, to beg for forgiveness right there. The other part, still proud, resisted. He had never had to beg for anything, but in that instant, he realized that arrogance no longer fit. Life was in front of him in the form of two little girls who didn't know who he was, and perhaps for now, it was better that way. Valerie walked away to attend to a lady entering the shop, leaving him there with the weight of his own absence. He turned to the girls. The quieter one was drawing a cat with delicate strokes, focused, as if the world around her were just a backdrop. He noticed his hands were trembling. In that instant, a certainty struck him. He wanted to be part of their lives. Not as someone who arrives and takes up space, but as someone who asks for permission. For that, he would need to confront everything he had done, and even more difficult, everything he had failed to do. Stephen left the shop slowly, like a man carrying the world on his shoulders. The sun still shone over the town, but inside him, it was all shadow. He walked aimlessly through the square, trying to make sense of what he had just seen. Images of the girls returned in flashes, their hair, their eyes, the innocent way they played, and the cruel certainty grew. They were his daughters. How could he have rejected all this? That was the question burning inside him. Valerie had never sought him out. She never sent a message. She never asked him for anything. He had believed that, by turning his back, he had closed that chapter. But now he understood that the story had only changed direction, and it had continued without him. He sat on a wooden bench, the same one where so many anonymous people had rested, without imagining that a rich man, accustomed to being in control, was feeling so small. Everything he had achieved seemed distant. Because in the face of that discovery, none of it mattered anymore. Those girls had grown up without him. They had learned to take their first steps, to talk, to laugh, without hearing his voice. Someone had taught them to brush their teeth, to get dressed, to say please and thank you. And it wasn't him. Stephen thought about how many birthdays he had missed, how many bedtime stories, how many unanswered questions. Had Valerie raised them with anger toward him in her heart? Or had she kept silent out of pride, perhaps for their protection? He didn't know. but he felt that the silence between them was now a minefield. One false step, and everything could collapse. Still, he no longer had a choice. He needed to cross it. He tried to remember the last time he had thought of Valerie with real depth. It wasn't in five-star hotels or on trips. It was on silent nights, when everything was too quiet, and her face would appear without permission. And now, along with that face, came two new ones. Small, curious, alive. Stephen ran his hand over his face, covering his eyes. It was pain, yes, but also regret. Real regret. The kind that isn't solved with expensive flowers or rehearsed phrases. The kind of regret that makes a man review his own history and admit that he failed badly. He thought about going back, about knocking on the shop door and demanding answers, but the pride he still had stopped him. He didn't want to repeat the same mistake, to force a path where he needed to be invited. And he also knew that there were questions that needed to be asked and answered. He took a deep breath and looked at the blue sky. Perhaps there was still time to do things differently. But first, he needed to understand what Valerie had gone through and why she had chosen silence. A glimmer of hope. Valerie closed the shop door after the last customer left, leaving behind only the soft scent of pet food and the muffled echo of children's footsteps. The girls were still playing in their corner, laughing with a gray kitten that insisted on climbing up boxes. The atmosphere was calm, almost cozy, but between her and Stephen, the air felt denser, as if every unspoken word took up space. He had come back and was there, leaning against the counter, as if waiting for permission to stay. Valerie crossed her arms and looked at him directly. The pain that once screamed inside her was now just silence. A silence he would have to learn to listen to. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. His voice lower than usual. Valerie nodded, but with a kind of calm that wasn't an invitation. It was more of a concession. After all, she knew this moment would come. She always knew that one day the past would knock on the door. She just didn't imagine she would see his face so lost. "They're my daughters, aren't they?" he ventured. Valerie looked at him firmly, but didn't answer immediately. Deep down, she might have wanted to scream, "Yes," to dump every tear she had shed onto his lap. But she had learned that not every answer needs to be said in the heat of the moment. Sometimes, silence teaches more. "I didn't come to fight," he added. I just wanted to understand." Valerie walked to a shelf. She pretended to arrange a package of pet food. The truth was, she also needed a second to breathe. Stephen was part of a life she had to bury to move on. And now, that ghost was in front of her, with eyes full of guilt. The girls came running over with some discovery, an old toy perhaps, and showed it to their mom with excitement. Valerie knelt down, listening to every little word with attention and affection. Stephen watched from a distance, seeing her there, so dedicated, so present, hurt more than he expected. That woman was no longer the girl he had left. When the girls went back to playing, Valerie looked up. "Do you want to know everything I went through?" she finally asked. He nodded, but she didn't say a word. She just walked to the door and took the handle. "Come back tomorrow if you really want to talk, but come prepared to listen." It was a gentle but direct blow. She wasn't kicking him out, but she wasn't welcoming him either. It was an invitation, yes, but with conditions, and that made it clear who was in control now. Stephen left the shop with a heavier heart than when he entered. Her silence accompanied him, a reminder of everything he still didn't know. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the girls' faces or heard Valerie's serene tone. There were no screams or accusations, just truths kept in a deep place, and he felt deep down that he needed to go there, even if it hurt. Because sometimes, Silence speaks what we don't dare to say. A silent transformation. Stephen returned to my sanctuary the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. He always came in a light, unhurried way, without grand gestures. He didn't arrive with promises or try to force smiles. He just showed up and stayed. He helped sweep the floor, clean the dishes, and change the cat's water. Simple things, but things that were full of intention. At first, Valerie watched him from a distance. She wanted to see how far he would go, not with words, but with actions. Stephen didn't complain. He came early. He left when the tasks were done. He carried heavy boxes, packed products, and restocked the pet food. All in silence, like someone trying to learn a new language, the language of presence. The twins, little by little, began to notice him. Isabella, curious, approached more easily. She asked questions. She asked for help feeding a puppy. She laughed at the stories he told, with a certain exaggeration. Luna was slower. She stayed at a distance, watching. But she no longer looked away when he passed by. Stephen learned to recognize the small signs. A side smile, a shy hello, a drawing left on the counter. Every gesture was a step. He didn't know much about being a father, but he began to understand that being a father wasn't about knowing everything. It was about being there, day after day, even without guarantees. Some days were easier. On others, he felt like he was back at square one. But he didn't give up. He knew he had lost precious years. And now he wanted to do things differently. Not to compensate, because some things cannot be compensated for, but to build something new. For real. With time. With care. Valerie began to realize that he was no longer the hurried, timid man she had known. Stephen no longer talked about trips, numbers, or deals. Now he talked about the habits of a grumpy cat, or how Luna hid to draw in peace. He was paying attention, and that made all the difference. One day, without him expecting it, Isabella called him Uncle Stephen. The word sounded sweet, familiar, and it hurt a little too. It wasn't Dad, but it was a start. He smiled, knelt down, and thanked her as if he had received the greatest gift in the world, because for him, in that moment, he had. Over time, he began to truly know the girls. He discovered that Isabella was full of energy, a chatterbox who wanted to be a veterinarian. Luna, on the other hand, liked silence. She scribbled on the world with colored pencils, and sometimes said more with a single look than with entire sentences. Each one had her own unique universe, and he wanted to be part of them. Stephen started writing little stories about the animals in the shop, inventing adventures with characters that resembled the twins. Valerie found one of those texts on a crumpled sheet of paper near the cash register. She read it in silence, and for the first time, she felt her heart truly soften. Not out of nostalgia, but out of recognition. Because there was a man who once ran away and was now learning to stay. Not in a hurry, not with speeches, but with consistency. And perhaps, in the end, that was what mattered most. A family rebuilt. The transformation of Stephen didn't happen overnight. It came little by little, in the small details of daily life. One day, he held a newborn kitten in his hands, and felt his heart squeeze in a strange way. It was too small, too fragile, too innocent. He had never noticed before. He always believed that sensitivity was a weakness, but in that instant, it was strength. On another afternoon, Isabella told him an invented story about a cat astronaut who lived on the moon and sent letters to a dog on Earth. Stephen listened to the whole thing, laughing at the absurd parts and praising the poorly drawn pictures. He never imagined that listening to a child could be so powerful. It was as if she saw him with clean, non-judgmental eyes. Luna took longer, but one day she left a drawing on the counter. It was a man sitting on the floor, surrounded by kittens and two girls. It was him. Stephen held the paper as if it were made of glass. He said nothing. He just put it in his pocket and took it home. He stared at that drawing for hours, like someone cherishing something sacred. Valerie watched everything with a mix of surprise and caution. She didn't give in easily, but she recognized the signs. Stephen was no longer a visitor. He was part of the routine. He cleaned cages, swept the sidewalk, organized shelves, and did everything with care. Not as an obligation, but as someone who truly wanted to be part of something bigger. He began to like the smell of the shop, the random conversations with customers, and the rough feel of the pet food bags. He felt that here he was finding something that money had never given him, a sense of belonging. In simple gestures, like bathing a frightened dog or feeding a sick cat, he recognized himself in a new way. Valerie gradually allowed small approximations. Lunch at home with the girls, a walk in the square on Sundays, a family board game. All with clear boundaries. But still, they were spaces that had once seemed impossible. And in those moments, Stephen didn't try to impress. He was just there, present, whole. One rainy morning, the twins got sick. Fever, coughs, sleepless nights. Stephen showed up with soup, blankets, and medicine. He waited outside, hoping Valerie would accept. And she did. For the first time, he helped take care of them. Not just to play, but to care. And that changed him more than any previous gesture. Over time, he learned to listen. Not just to the words, but to the silences. He knew when Luna needed space. He knew when Isabella needed to talk too much to hide some insecurity. And he also knew when Valerie was tired, even without her saying so. It was as if he was tuning his senses for the family that he was beginning to recognize as his own. The small miracles were in everything, in an unexpected hug, in a whispered, "Thank you," in a cup of coffee shared in silence. Things that would have gone unnoticed before, but now had the weight of revelations. Stephen understood more and more that loving is not about talking. It is about staying. It is about caring even when no one is watching. And in that daily life full of meows, laughter, and little hands, he finally discovered what it meant to be a father. Not by title, but by presence, by dedication, by the transformation that happens when you stop thinking about yourself and start loving for real. A masterpiece of life. It was a normal afternoon, with the sun entering lazily through the shop's windows and the smell of pet food mixing with the sound of meows. The twins were playing with empty boxes, laughing at some invention of the moment. Stephen was nearby, tidying shelves, when he felt something different in his chest. A discomfort that wasn't pain. It was urgency. He looked at Valerie, who was folding rags on the counter, and then looked back at the girls. He felt there was a conversation he could no longer postpone. You couldn't continue building bonds without first facing your own absence. And in that moment, Stephen decided it was time to say what had never been said, with all the words, with all the faults. "Girls," he called them in a low but firm voice. They both turned at the same time. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" They approached with the lightness of those who don't carry a past. Stephen knelt on the floor, getting down to their eye level. Valerie stopped what she was doing and watched in silence. He took a deep breath. His heart was racing. The words came out slowly, as if they needed to get through years of silence. "I want to tell you something and apologize, for real." The girls exchanged a quick glance, curious. Luna held the hem of her dress. Isabella frowned. They waited. He continued, "When you were in your mom's tummy, I didn't stay. I left, and that was wrong. Very wrong. I was scared. I was selfish. And I left your mom alone at a time when she needed me most. And you? You grew up without knowing who I was, because I didn't know how to be a better person." Valerie pressed her lips together. She was standing still, but her heart was beating as if she were also on her knees there. Stephen continued, his eyes welling up. "I can't go back in time. I can't change what I did. But I can say that I'm sorry. For real. And that I want to be here now, if you'll let me." Isabella was the first to speak. Her voice came out low, almost a whisper. "Were you scared of us?" Stephen swallowed. "Yes, I was. But not because you didn't deserve me. It was because I didn't know how to be a better person. And running away seemed easier." Luna, who had remained silent until then, rested her head on her sister's shoulder. There were no immediate hugs, no pre-made phrases of forgiveness. But there, on that floor, in front of two girls and a woman who had held everything together alone, Stephen shed all his armor. For the first time, he showed his vulnerability without shame. It was just him asking for forgiveness, stripped of vanity, full of truth. Valerie slowly approached, knelt beside him, looked him in the eye, and said in a firm voice, "They don't know everything you caused, but I do. And even so, I let you back in. Not out of weakness, but because they deserve the opportunity to know a father who is trying to do things right." And in that instant, without grand gestures, something new was born. A forgiveness yet to be named, a dedication under construction, and above all, the certainty that love, when it is sincere, begins precisely when you have the courage to show where it hurts. The circle closes. The days passed peacefully, but Valerie felt a strange weight approaching. Rumors began to circulate. A new company wanted to buy the land around the square, including the shop's location. The offer was generous, but it meant only one thing: the end of my sanctuary and everything it represented. Valerie received the news with a firm face, but a heavy heart. The shop wasn't just a business. It was her history, her roots, the home where she had raised her daughters and rebuilt herself from the ruins. Thinking about dismantling those shelves, taking the kittens out, was like turning off a living part of herself. But fighting against influential businessmen seemed impossible. When Stephen found out, he didn't react with empty words. He didn't say, "Everything will be okay." He didn't promise the world. He just listened, attentively, respectfully. That night, he didn't sleep. He paced the apartment, reviewing papers, making calls. He knew who was behind the project, and more than that, he knew he had influence there. The next morning, he went straight to a meeting with old partners, people he hadn't spoken to in a long time. Businessmen who only understood one language: profit. Stephen put something on the table that no one expected: his own share of a multi-million-dollar contract in exchange for a single condition: that the My Sanctuary location be excluded from the project. The board members laughed at first. They thought he was bluffing, but they soon realized he was serious. He would give up prestige, participation, and influence. "Why?" he asked. "Because for the first time," he said, "I understand what it is to have something that cannot be replaced by money." It was the most difficult meeting of his life, and also the most truthful. Valerie only found out days later. He didn't tell her. It was the landlord who showed up at the shop with a new contract and a smile on his face. "Your place is guaranteed, Ms. Valerie. Someone very determined made this happen." She was surprised. She asked who, but the man only replied, "Someone who learned to value roots." She looked for Stephen that same afternoon. She found him sitting in the square, watching the girls play with a new puppy. When she asked him what he had done, he replied simply, "I just did what I should have done from the beginning, taken care of what matters." She didn't say anything, but her look was deeper than any response. That night, Valerie closed the shop slowly. She ran her hands over the shelves, petted the kittens, looked at the drawing with the girls' scribbles, and cried. For the first time, not out of pain, but out of relief. She felt that, for the first time, someone had stayed. Not just for her, but for everything she had built with so much love. Stephen didn't save the shop out of heroism. He did it because he finally understood that caring isn't about showing up with flowers. It's about showing up when there's a fire. It's about putting yourself in someone else's shoes and truly offering what you have, even if it costs you dearly, even if no one sees it, because loving is acting. And in that silent gesture, he showed that he had changed. Time has a strange way of healing. It doesn't erase the pain, but it changes its color. What once burned only hurts slightly, and one day the pain becomes a memory. That's how it was with Valerie. She didn't forget what she had lived through. She didn't erase the absence, nor did she pretend she hadn't suffered. But little by little, the weight was transforming into space. Space to think, to feel, to perhaps forgive. She watched Stephen often, not out of distrust, but out of habit. Every gesture of his was a new chapter. He now knew how to fold the shop's towels, separate the pet food by type, and understood that Luna liked silence before bed. It wasn't perfection. It was effort. It was presence. And that, more than any word, moved her. One Sunday, the twins were lying on the shop floor, playing with the kittens, when Isabella suddenly asked, "Mommy, can Uncle Stephen have dinner with us tonight?" Valerie hesitated. She looked at him. He said nothing. He just waited. And in that small gesture of waiting, she felt something different, an old weariness leaving her. That night, they had dinner together for the first time in a long time. The table was simple, with rice, beans, vegetables, and juice. The girls chattered away, laughing and telling stories from school. Stephen listened with the calm gaze of someone who doesn't want to dominate the conversation, only to be a part of it. And Valerie, for the first time, didn't feel like running away. After the girls fell asleep, he offered to do the dishes. She didn't stop him. The two stood side by side, in silence, with the sound of water and gently clinking plates, until she said, "You've really changed." It was a simple phrase, but full of weight. He paused for a second, looked her in the eyes, and replied, "You taught me to change. I just didn't know you were teaching me." Valerie took a deep breath. She knew there were no guarantees. Loving someone who has hurt you requires a different kind of courage, a mature courage that knows trust is not blind surrender. It is a daily choice. And in that moment, she understood that moving forward was not about forgetting the past. It was about deciding that it would no longer rule her present. In the days that followed, she allowed small approaches, a walk to the market together, an afternoon reading with the girls, a note left on the door with a "Good morning," drawn by Stephen. Simple things that spoke louder than any grand declaration, because love, after being broken, is not rebuilt in a hurry. She knew there was a risk, there always is, but there was also a sincere desire to try, not out of nostalgia, but because she saw the transformation happening with her own eyes. Stephen was now a man who didn't run away, and for her, that was bigger than any gesture from the past. Valerie still carried scars, yes, but now she looked at them without pain, like marks of a difficult but overcome story. And there, among pet toys, washed dishes, and hands that no longer let go so easily, she realized that love wasn't perfect, but it was possible, even after everything. And in that silent yes she gave, deep in her heart there was no illusion. There was a choice. The choice to continue, to start over, and, who knows, to love again in a new, stronger, and truer way. That afternoon, the sun seemed gentler. The light entered through the windows of my sanctuary with a serene calm, warming the old tiled floor and the corners where the kittens slept peacefully. The twins ran through the shop with their hair loose, carrying baskets of toys. Valerie watched from a distance, smiling in silence, and by her side was Stephen, not as a visitor, but as part of the scene. He was holding a carton of milk and laughing at something Isabella had said. Luna, as always, moved more slowly, but now she took his hand naturally. There was no longer fear in her eyes, only trust. Stephen, who once feared not fitting in anywhere, now felt that he belonged, not out of obligation, but out of worthiness. Valerie swept the floor with light movements. Sometimes she was surprised to think about everything they had been through, everything they had endured. Now, looking around, she saw the result. A shop full of life, a good scent, and voices she loved. From time to time, her eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, the kind that cleanse, not drown. My sanctuary was no longer just a pet shop. It was a space where stories crossed paths, where wounds healed in silence, and where love was not spoken of, but lived. An abandoned dog found a new home. A sick cat was cared for with affection. And in the midst of it all, a family that was once broken was remade. A new customer entered and commented, "This place has a different vibe. It feels like everything here has a soul." Valerie thanked them with a shy smile, while Stephen put more bags of food on the shelf. The girls sat down to draw, and without a word, they began to scribble the same scene. The shop, the cats, their mom, their dad, all together. In that moment, Stephen knelt beside them and looked at the drawing. His eyes glistened. He didn't need anything else. This was what he had always looked for and never found at parties, on trips, or in business. In the innocent strokes of two little girls, he understood that true love lives where you decide to stay. Valerie saw him there, kneeling, surrounded by his daughters, and felt something deep in her chest. It wasn't euphoria. It was peace. A peace that only comes when you accept the past, but choose to live in the present. She approached, took his hand, and said softly, "Thank you for not running away again." He squeezed her hand gently and replied, "Now I know this is where I want to be." At closing time, everyone helped. It was almost a ritual. The kittens were put in their corners, the lights were carefully turned off, and the bell on the door jingled like a happy farewell. Outside, the square still vibrated with the sounds of sunset, but inside, the heart of the story beat louder than ever. Before leaving, the twins ran to their parents and hugged them at the same time, a hug without warning, full of strength, laughter, and life. Valerie closed her eyes for an instant, as if to engrave that moment in her heart, and in that instant, she knew. Now, they had a family, not perfect, but whole. And so, my sanctuary came to shelter not only animals looking for a home, but also hearts that were once broken, and that, with time, patience, guys, and Labachana found their way back home. I invite you to share your opinion on this incredible story in the comments. If you liked it, share it, and subscribe to the channel to support our work. Another story is appearing on your screen that will probably also move you. Don't miss it.